All right, ladies and gents, lesson 8. Our objective is to use understanding of fraction equivalence to investigate decimals on a place value chart. So what you're going to need is your problem set for this. Lesson 8 template is what we're working on. I'll give you a second to go get that. All right, now that we are back together, I want you to look at what I've shaded in. Let's look at this first square. Can you tell me how many tenths are in 1? Well, if you said 10 tenths, you are correct. I'm going to write 10 tenths. What I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to pause, and I'd like you to shade in 10 tenths and write 10 tenths. If you were smart, you probably also put 10 tenths here because you notice that they are 2 holes shaded in. Let's go ahead and add those together. Now, how many tenths are represented here? Well, you should have said 4 tenths. So we're going to add 4 tenths. So now what I want you to do for me is I want you to tell me how many tenths we have total. 10 tenths plus 10 tenths plus 4 tenths equals 24 tenths. Now some of you might be thinking, oh, you write it like this, 0.24. But that's incorrect because this space is hundredths. And wherever you end is what you say, 24 hundredths. So that is incorrect. 24 tenths. See if you can figure out what 24 tenths is. By using your area models, you can probably see that I have 1 hole, 2 holes, so it's 2 holes and 4 tenths. Or you could have used a number bond, 24 tenths, and pulled out your holes. 10 tenths, 10 tenths, and 4 tenths, which equals 1 plus 1 plus 4 tenths, which is 2 and 4 tenths. You could have done it that way. For what I want you to do next, I would like you to shade 2 ones and then 40 hundredths. So 2 ones and 40 hundredths. Go ahead and shade that in. Pause. All right, if you colored in 2 holes and 40 hundredths, this is probably what it should look like. So how many hundredths are in this hole? So how many hundredths? Well, there are 100 hundredths because we know if I cut these into hundredths, there'd be 100 hundredths. Same story here. Go ahead and write that down. Don't forget to add them. And then we said we had 40 hundredths. Go ahead and figure out what that equals as far as a unit form and a decimal. Pause while you do it. You should have come up with 100, 200, 40 hundredths, or 2 and 40 hundredths. Do you notice a connection here? 2 and 4 tenths is the same as 2 and 40 hundredths. They are equivalent because 4 tenths and 40 hundredths is the same. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our place value chart. Can you go ahead and show me 2 holes as tenths? So if I wanted 2 holes, how many tenths would that be? Well, first off, we're going to put our 2 ones there. Now, we're unbundling. So this guy comes across because I want to make him tenths. How many tenths are in a hole? Well, there are 10. So we put them in groups of 5. Nicely done. That's 1 tenth, or 1 whole decomposed into tenths. I need to decompose this one as well. Please go ahead and pause while you do that. Here's what you should have ended up with. If you need to X these off because you know you've used them, that's fine. But what this was is 2 ones or 2 wholes is the same as how many tenths? Well, it would be 2 tenths. I lied. It would be 20 tenths. So, we wouldn't have that. I apologize. 20 tenths looks like that. 20 tenths. I said tenths because that's where I ended. 20 tenths. There are 20 of them. 20 tenths. I know there's 2 wholes and 20 tenths. That's why it actually equals 2. 20 tenths. What we're going to do on this side is I would like you to go ahead and put out the number 2 and 45 hundredths. Can you please plot the number 2 and 45 hundredths? Pause while you do it. You should have had 2 wholes, 4 tenths, and 5 hundredths. Imagine I wanted to figure out how many hundredths total I had. How many hundredths total? What I would have to do is I would have to take every single one of these and decompose it. I know how many hundredths are in a tenth. Well, there are 10 hundredths, so I would have to turn this into 10. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every single one of them. Or I could look at this number and I could say, well, 245 hundredths, because 100 hundredths, 100 hundredths, that's 200 hundredths, and then 45 hundredths, which equals 1 plus 45 hundredths. Do you see how I took 2 and 45 hundredths and turned it into 245 hundredths? It's the same exact thing. 2 wholes became 20 tenths. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to turn to your problem set really quickly, just on the, not the homework section, problem set, to look at number 3, 4, and 5. 3, it says we're decomposing the units to represent tenths. Well, you all know 1 whole equals 10 tenths. That one you know. Let's look at this one. I have 1 and 7 tenths. If I used my chart right here, I had 1 and 7 tenths, I would decompose. So really what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the number 17. It's like I'm imagining that decimal is not there. Because 1 whole is 10 tenths, plus 7 more would be 17 tenths. 10 wholes is 10 times 10, because if 1 whole is 10 tenths, I have 10 wholes times 10 tenths. That'd be 100. Plus the 7 tenths I already have. It's 107 tenths. Do you see how we're working through this? Let's go down to number 4. 4 says we're going to represent into hundredths. So if I look at that, same thing. 1 and 7 tenths. Well, how many hundredths is that? I can very easily figure this out by looking at 1 and 7 tenths and turning it into 1 and 70 hundredths, because I know they're equivalent. That 0 just takes me to the hundredths place. So 1 and 7 tenths is the same as 1 and 70 hundredths. Once I see that, I know that in 1 whole, that's 100 hundredths. 100 plus 70 hundredths is 170 hundredths. And that's how we break it down. And last thing, let's look at 5. It just says to complete the chart, you're going to do exactly like they did here. You're going to take your decimal. You're going to turn it into a mixed number. And then you're going to figure out, how many tenths are there? Well, by looking at it, I have 2 wholes, 10 tenths per whole, so that'd be 20 tenths, plus 1 more is 21 tenths. I can take my 2 1/10 and turn it into 2 10/100. Well, they're the same. And then I take my 2 10/100 and I say, oh, there are 100 hundredths in a whole. I have 2 wholes. So 100 hundredths plus 100 hundredths is 200 hundredths. Plus 10 more is 210 hundredths. And you're going to do that for all of them. Go ahead and find a partner.